I'm going to be sharing about Keter from the Kabbalah Center. You know, one of my favorite sources of learning Kabbalah these days. They have a teacher there who's been there like over a decade. His name is David Guillaume. And he ran a workshop on Keter where I learned a lot of great information. So that's the main source for a lot of this material. And first of all, we have to start by saying Keter means crown and light, and it's like the light that's for the vessel. So it's part of the upper three sfirot, which are called Chachma, Bina. And then sometimes we say Keter is not even its own vessel. Chachma and Bina, when they come together, have their own vessel. What does that mean? That means Keter, the crown, the light above, sort of this transcendental, transpersonal kind of light, and it's a crown. And the tetragrammaton is kind of like the idea that our eyes and ears absorb divine consciousness from the letters. So the tip of the yud is like the keter, and then the yud is like the chachma. So sometimes we say the yud is a letter, so it's the first letter of the tetragrammaton, holy name of the creator that was, is, and always will be. So if you say that keter is included and then chachma is like part of it, chachma is the first separation enough that you could call it its own sphere orbit, and then you have bina. And then you have das, which is not considered on the tree as a traditional one, but in the trees that don't include keter as a separate one, you would say when chachma and bina come together, there is the reflection of the keter as a das, which is like the upper lower version of this light crown, this information, what can become, what can manifest. Some people call it third eye, pineal gland, whatever. Okay, so chachma is the right side of the brain, bina is the left. These do not refer to only the physical brain, but the spiritual mind, which is not only in certain parts of the body. For example, it's not only in the brain or the heart. So expressed behaviors are dictated by feelings, which is like the trunk. The thoughts are the roots, which is like the mind, and they come from the seed, which is like consciousness. Subconscious means we're not even aware of them. We're kind of like upside down, right? Because our thoughts kind of like, it's our feet and our hands that get us into the world, and we engage and become connected. Like we use our hands to put food in our mouth, or drinks, or smoking, or painting, and so on, right? So the upper worlds will reflect the lower worlds, and each of the four worlds has the 10 dimensions. So this four worlds I spoke about is the tetragrammaton, 4 letters. You have 7 of these come into one, which is the vav. You have the hey, the yud and the hey, and then the vav, and then the hey is the final one. So there's 10 here. So you would have 7, 1, 2, and 3. 1 and 2, 7, and 1, represented by 4. But then each of these actually have 10. So it's like this spheres inside out spheres. It's hard to wrap your mind around. That's why Keter, they say, is a little bit beyond regular thinking. And Keter of the lowest world of these 4, right, is the malchut of the next world. So mati velo mati means it's here and it's not here, kind of like this idea. And it exists and it doesn't. I know and I don't. And God humbles us by making us forget so we can keep learning and earning, instead of what happens where we grow our ego. We get bigger, our ego gets bigger. We get bigger. So it looks seamless, but actually our ego's huge. Versus when we let go of us being bigger, the ego doesn't need to. Let go of us being bigger. But we're still growing with time. So it's like, it's a stable growth. And at this whole time, look how much space ends up being able to be between as big as we think we are and as big as our ego gets. So the malchut, or like the manifested expression of the thoughts, would be what the thoughts of one world creates the manifestation, but those manifestations have an inverse. You would think of this as functions in math, right? You have an inverse function. You could derive the original function, or even the original information. So like, what's the function of x? But you'd have to go for x, right? And then if you're finding the inverse of x, then you need to know your limits. So the only way of judging externality arising is from a perceived judgment or an internal landscape lack. So we kind of like malchut consciousness is small enough to hold judgments and therefore reactions, because it's in this small PC world. But Keter consciousness, which is not small enough to partner with whatever satanic energy might be using you, it can, there's no, the energy of unfulfillment or desire or duality, it's just not existent in that more subtle area. So that's why I say we're kind of like upside down, and it's like Keter is that complete, certain, abundant, perfect whole. It's literally creator. It's malchut. Okay, so the inverse function, right? So malchut is the wanting, the needing, the seeking, the trying, the working, the receiver. So you have this like, through the Keter, you learn about the malchut, and from the malchut, you learn about the Keter, because the new world is made, this Keter gives, right, the 4 worlds, the 1, the 2, the 7, and the 1, and that 1 becomes the new Keter, and then that one gives 1, 2. It's like birthing, it's like a contraction, and then a new. So knowing that bad news is a time to inject positivity of Keter consciousness means that since it's how to work with time and space limitations, by being outside of time and space to override doubts, it's obviously Keter consciousness is quantum. So it's a one mind, it's linking with all the other minds that can receive unsaid cognitive processes of the people around them. People call that mind reading, but by observing an event, the event changes. So physicality can collapse or alter just from being seen or known. This may sound really radical, but I'm saying it casually because these days it's pretty much accepted that when you're aware of it, you're measuring it, you're collapsing its possibilities. So when we know how to observe, or who is looking, or what consciousness is present, we're having vessel experiences because there's an inner light and a surrounding light, a current flowing, or the potential, and it's not free. We must meet it for it to be held stably. Or it would just fizzle out, even hurt us if we can't contain it, if the vessel's not ready, right? Because the surrounding light gives pressure, tension, and stress. It doesn't let us be comfortable and stagnant. And so behind the discomfort is this glorious, empowering light that will expand and free us from a smaller, less stable vessel that's likely to stay in the comfort zone, in a smaller place. So this pushes us toward our perfection, our creator, but each time it's like push, but it gets closer each time to what our idea of here is perfection. But it's a light for the vessel. Each time the vessel becomes a light giver, and then it becomes a vessel, and then it becomes a light giver, and then it becomes a vessel. But each time it goes out, it goes like more and more. So when something negative happens, it could be the portal to the vessel to directly work with it, because like I just said, when we get pulled down, we can elevate the consciousness to an even bigger picture, an even greater good. Like each time we go in, it's to go even higher. So this might be known as the Keter consciousness idea, but how we could look at it is that in places previously that there was just the empty or broken vessel, we can now work, like where it was just, there was no solution, we could suck it in. Malchut can suck in Keter consciousness when we reawaken the truth of our feelings. So we do everything for the sake of its existence, the experience itself, the vibrational source. So we say, I want to feel alive. Like I've been numb for so long in such and such area, and it just didn't feel like I would ever have, let's say, the job I wanted, or the family, or that my gender role, or my universal meaning. And these are big deals. You know, I'll probably talk about this in the future, these kind of topics. But when we work with those areas, we're bringing new possibility, but we need to have stress for in other words, again, the system grows, it gets pulled back a little, but as it gets pulled back, it's bigger than it was in the pullback before, because it grows even bigger after that. Then it pulls back, it's bigger than it just was in the previous pullback, and then it grows bigger. So each time we're infusing something new into the old, every time we even think it's just exactly the same as before, because we might be comforted in seeing clearly that history repeats itself, but we have to recognize as well that still nothing is ever the same as it was before. Maybe there's nothing new under the sun, but the constantly recombining information. I mean, just think of DNA with 4 bases, and think of the Hebrew alphabet, which is said to be, let's say, the code. It's representing the code of the universe material, which most of we can't even see, and that's 22 letters. So these recombinations create a lot of room for newness and possibility. So anyway, when we get our dreams coming true, or our desires being filled, which are constantly recombining, right? Even these desires or dreams, we have to push it back and let it go. Let it flow for us. Then this is what allows it to come. So in other words, the right way in the perfect package made for us is not going to be at the moment where the stress is coming in or we're pushing out. It's actually going to be in the middle area. So in the seamlessness, what we might hope for is not the version where we keep getting bigger and our ego keeps getting bigger, but that a practice for making that space bigger is we get bigger and we let it all go. We behave as if we're smaller. We don't need all the credit and honor. Our ego gets smaller. And then we get that space in between. And then that is where the new flow comes in. So when we're in the roughness, the rawness, and the crudeness, but in those areas, it's like when you take a deep breath into tight rib muscles. A smoker might know you have tight muscles around your lungs. You take a deep breath in the tight places, those become refined and reliable and subtle. It's in the little tiny intercostal muscles that we really can take those deep breaths. It's not necessarily just like, it's not just in the pectorals, right? So, in other words, a deep breath, which might be like, actually becomes slow and steady and refined and subtle because it's moving into all the different areas in between, right? So we're trusting that we can be patient to wait for better, which actually frees us from grabbing the goodies or the delights that appear as if there won't be anything better coming. We're reacting as if we're in the small, even though for a moment we might be in the big. So when we let it go, the initial temptation, we can actually use that gains power of restriction to then dedicate our receiving of its returning and blessing to the giver. So we pleasure God by loving what we got. And like, I wanted this so much, you know? So doing everything for the sake of our Creator is living for the Creator. Security replaces that low self-esteem. So here we think, oh, my ego's so low, I'm behaving like I'm smaller, I'm a nobody. But actually, God's treating us honorably because we're not trying so hard. So we end up just feeling like, okay, let me at least make something worth of my time. Let me have some purpose rather than being dependent or, you know, excitement in life, just like I'm having a good time. I want to do this replaces that needing approval, and self-love replaces self-hatred where we're constantly like overcompensating because it's quick fixes. See, I'm good, Shayna, right? Really, it's the same as the next. Really, like our enjoyment replaces our emptiness. We're not just pretending or sweeping it under the rug. We're actually. So being a double agent of Keter is like as we receive, we're sharing for all the reasons I mentioned, because we become that pure channel for the ultimate giver and creator. Each time we stop becoming a small-minded, and every time we feed a desire, it grows bigger, right? I said we get bigger, we have a bigger desire, and then if we don't make ourselves smaller or let go, our ego will catch up. Our desire, hunger, capacity will get bigger. You won't even feel more satisfied. You're going to need more, right? We all know about this, dependency. So that's why I say purpose replaces dependency, and excitement replaces needing approval. Self-love replaces self-hatred. Because we dedicate our messenger to be the first person who approaches us to share something. In other words, our question is, that we can meditate on, is what's my purpose to align with? And more, and devote and revolve around, and this is how to become that pure channel, because in doing so, we might be receiving purpose, but we're giving ourselves. So I hope that was a good way to look at Keter, at wearing a crown of lights in the world.